Welcome to Stories of Transformation, a NRCDV radio podcast production. You're listening to our Delta Focus Story Series, an initiative of the PreventIPV project. I am Yvonne Ortiz, Training Institute Manager at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. This series features lessons learned from CDC's Delta Focus grantees who work to prevent intimate partner violence by implementing strategies to change the environments and conditions in which people live, work, and play. In today's episode, our guest host Casey Keene, Director of Programs and Prevention at the NRCDV, talks with Megan Crouch, Director of the Violence Free Coalition in Lebanon, Ohio, Kristen Nimsick, Public Policy Manager for the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, and Melody Crispodine of Peace Over Violence in Los Angeles about their experiences with engaging youth in intimate partner prevention. First, we'll hear from Megan Crouch, who is Director of the Violence Free Coalition, which is the prevention unit of the Abuse and Rape Crisis Shelter of Warren County. Megan has been in the prevention field for 13 years. In addition to other programs, she was the local project coordinator for the Delta Focus grant in Ohio and now the Delta Impact grant from CDC, which has allowed her the opportunity to be the adult facilitator for the Teen Alliance Council.
Megan, welcome to NRCDV Radio's Delta Focus Story Series. We are so happy to have you with us today to share some of your experiences with engaging youth in intimate partner violence prevention in your community. Specifically, we'd like to learn more about your work with the Teen Alliance Council, which engages youth in knowledge and leadership building activities to become prevention ambassadors within their own spheres of influence. So, Megan, I'd like to begin by just asking if you could tell me a little bit about the history of the Teen Alliance Council and how it's sort of evolved over time.
Absolutely. We began our Teen Alliance Council back in 2013, and at the time we were very excited because we had 9 students from 3 of our 8 school districts here in Warren County. It was brought up many times in our adult coalition meetings that we were planning programming for our youth, but we did not have a youth voice in that planning process. And we decided to take that on as one of our up-and-coming missions for our agency. In 2015, we expanded our mission of teen dating violence, sexual assault prevention to include the substance abuse arena. We partnered with our local coalition in 2015. And we're very excited that in 2019 we are up to 27 students and have 7 of our 8 local school districts represented.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations on that. And it's great to see that you've had this longevity with the project. It really speaks to its sustainability. So can you tell me, Megan, along the way, what has surprised you kind of about how the Teen Alliance Council has evolved or, related to your project? What have the surprises been?
I think the first big surprise for us was that it wasn't necessarily going to go as planned. We have evolved and shifted and changed things pretty much every year. I know as adults we tend to like things to be the same, and we think that our programming should be pretty consistent. And the youth like to shake things up every year, and we have to be flexible and go with it. It's okay to fail, and one of the things that I have struggled with that I've gotten better at is using that failure, or what I thought was a failure, to process with the kids to get them to recognize that not everything's going to work out the first time you try it. What did we do good? What could we do better? So that was, I think, probably one of the first surprises for me as an adult facilitator, was how often this was going to evolve. And I think the second biggest surprise for me was we thought about the youth at the time we were working with them and how they were going to educate themselves and how they were going to then spread that message amongst their peers. But what we didn't think about was how they were going to grow up into adults and use that knowledge in their professional careers. And since we've been doing this so long, since 2013, we are now watching our first group of TAC students as adults. We have one student who I was her reference into the police academy, and she is now a certified state of Ohio police officer. and she's doing amazing work as a first-year female police officer. And I think of the impact of her responding to a domestic violence call and how she will handle things differently than someone who hasn't gone through our program. We have an RA up in Michigan State whose dorm just won the most inclusive and supportive dorm on campus, and that's some of her work. So it's just really neat to see how we've impacted these youth during high school, but then how they are becoming the new leaders in some of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing. And you're right. A lot of times we, think about youth engagement work as, what's happening with youth currently, and not thinking about sort of the ripple effect or the impact that it's going to have for these youth as they grow and develop their whole lives long. And what an investment it is, a project like this in, just in the future of our movement and the future of our work together. That's amazing. So,
and the connection we still have with these youth.
Yeah, and
I still get emails, I get text messages, we're on social media, they still email me for advice. So I think that is also a bonus, that connection to a caring adult that has continued as they've grown.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, and how that sort of, is a factor in promoting resilience, and how that is, growing a community, growing a healthy community. That's
absolutely
very cool. Thank you. That's very cool. I love it. So what about then, and this may be connected to kind of what you just talked about, but what about the Teen Alliance Council makes you feel the most proud?
I think probably the biggest thing for me is that the youth have a voice in our county, and that it's not just a token voice. They're not just being asked, what font do you like on this poster, or what type of pizza should we serve at the youth summit. They're actually really being valued in the community for their opinions, for their voice of what's working and what should we as programmers be doing in our communities to make it better for youth. They're actually getting to share their information. We had a retreat for the Substance Abuse Coalition, and we invited our TAC students to come and to share what they thought was the issues around substance abuse in our community, and they sat at the table right along with adults from the mental health field, with suicide prevention field, and all of these different areas, and they had a voice. So it was pretty neat to see.
That's awesome. That's really building. That's your intention there, and what's happening, and the impact I'm hearing from you is you're building an intergenerational movement, which is, I think, something we strive for, something we want, something we see the richness in and the value in, and that's sort of what you're building in your community there.
Absolutely, and it's neat to see where they're the same and where they're different too. That's been an interesting thing for me to view as I'm working with both sides of the adult part of our coalition and the youth part.
Okay, so meaning, the youth voice is not a single voice, right? There's great diversity in youth voices the same way there's great diversity in adult voices. And so having youth representation means more than having just one voice at the table. Yeah, interesting. That's cool. So, so let's talk about kind of what key resources or tools or partnerships have really been critical or really instrumental in the success of the Teen Alliance Council.
I think where our group, I think we were doing well on our own as a coalition, but I think in 2015, when we broadened our subject to include substance abuse, became partners with the Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, when we started seeking additional funding from our mental health board, I think that's really where our program took off, because we were all seeking the same youth, and it's really hard, as most people who are working with youth know, to get them involved and engaged. And so anything we can do to make that easier on them, and by having so many topics covered by this one coalition, by our youth coalition, I think that was essential. We have so many resources now, so if we need something that our grant doesn't cover, we can put it out to both of our coalitions, and usually within a day we have a response and somebody's willing to help. and our adults are invested in it. We have a youth summit once a year, and we have 60 to 100 kids come to this one-day event, and we will have 20 to 30 adults there giving their day as well. So I think that partnership with other coalitions in our community has really helped keep us growing and keep us moving in the direction that we want to go into. Because there's a lot of things that these kids want to say, and just giving them a voice in all these topics, I think, has been very helpful.
Yeah, I love what you're saying in terms of kind of integrating, these different issues that impact youth and that youth care about and that they want to have a voice in. Because I as we've learned from connecting the dots, right, all different kinds of violence they're interconnected, and so are the risk factors, and so are the protective factors, and that we've so traditionally had this siloed approach to addressing the various different issues that impact youth. So what I'm hearing is that you've really taken this integrated approach, and that by bringing in partners and bringing in related topics, all in the same space, it's making a difference, and that youth are able to kind of impact change along just like a variety of subjects and key issues that are relevant to them.
We have absolutely. Connecting the dots is hanging right next to my desk. It is my favorite document that I've ever had come down from CDC. It's so impactful, and it gives us the ability to reach out to partners we wouldn't have normally reached out to, and connect and show them that by working on this issue, we're also helping to affect your issue. And so we don't need to be in our offices just working on one individual topic. We can work together, and it's actually influenced us as adults. Warren County has started a collective impact movement and group, so we are actually kind of taking the lead, taking it from the youth and moving in that direction as adults ourselves. So
that's awesome. I love that collective impact that you're making there in your community. Thank you so much, Megan. I so appreciate you spending this time with me and, sharing with all of us your experience doing this work. And is there anything else that you would like to share before we end?
I think the last thing I probably would want to share is that it's really making a difference in the lives of these teens. And it's also helping them in college. So we kind of use the lure of it looks good on a college resume, but that really paid off this year. We had 3 teens from our council get full rides to their college, and they were specifically told that the Teen Alliance Council work that they did set them apart. So it's definitely helping them personally and in their future goals. So we're very proud of that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. The work that you're doing is clearly making an impact, and I'm so grateful that you were sharing this with us today, Megan. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Melody Cruz-Podin, Prevention and Policy Director for Peace Over Violence in Los Angeles. Under her leadership, the Prevention Division has continued its long legacy of empowering youth to harness their innate leadership skills, mobilizing community members for violence prevention, partnering with educational institutions to support students and families, and engaging men and boys in the movement to end gender-based violence. She is joined by Krista Nimsek, Public Policy Manager for the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. Krista works to ensure that the voices of domestic violence program survivors and communities are heard and reflected in state and federal policy decisions. A key policy priority for the California Partnership is to advance strategies to prevent domestic violence before it occurs. As just one component of this strategy, Krista oversees the partnership's CDC-funded Prevention Delta project.
Hello and welcome to Melody and Krista. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your work with the Youth Over Violence Leadership Institute and Internship Program to educate and empower youth to engage in violence prevention work in California. So first, Melody, can you start us off by giving us a little background about the Youth Over Violence initiative?
Yeah, so the Youth Over Violence Initiative is a year-long program that we host here at Peace Over Violence that starts with a 5-week summer program that takes place during the months of June and July, in which we bring 30 teenagers from around Los Angeles to be part of this 5-week program where they learn the ins and outs of violence prevention when it comes to domestic violence and sexual violence. They learn about community mobilizing, they learn about how to be peer advocates, and then they work on their own internship projects to take the information that they've learned and really apply it into something tangible that they can bring into their communities. And at the end of the summer, once they go back to school, they spend that following school year, again, putting their skills into practice by creating community engagement and education events on their respective school campuses.
Wow. It sounds so far-reaching, and just the impact can, I think, be so powerful with that many students involved year after year. How many years have you been engaging youth in this project?
So we're actually in the middle of our 9th year hosting this institute.
Oh, wow. Okay. And you're right in the thick of it at the moment, aren't you? In the middle of July now.
We are. Yeah, the youth actually just started this morning on their internship project. So they've been divided into 3 different groups. One group is going to be working on community mobilizing. One group is working on creative writing and performance. And the third group is working on digital and social media. So those are kind of the overall themes. And then they get to create what their project is out of those themes.
Okay, wonderful. So, Krista, do you have anything to add about kind of the history or the work of the initiative from your perspective at the coalition?
Yeah, I think that just one thing I'll add is it's been really inspiring and really fun to see how the Institute changes every year because it's a new set of youth coming into the project each year. The particular issues and items they choose to work on always changes, always varies, and it's really powerful to see what the youth identify as the pressing needs and where they want to put their time and energy. So, I always love about this time of year getting to chat with Melody and hear what they're up to and what the youth have identified for this particular cohort. So.
Yeah, that's great. No, it sounds to me like it's very youth-driven, right? The goal is really of the project. So, Melody, when you think about kind of the resources and tools and partnerships that were really critical to the ongoing success of this project, what comes to mind for you?
I think that the way that our project through Delta Focused was created and formatted really was integral into the success of the program. So working with Krista and the partnership and getting their guidance of having kind of a statewide view of these issues was incredibly helpful. We also partnered with another organization in a very rural part of California that kind of gave us a different perspective to consider how to really engage youth because we're located in downtown Los Angeles. And so in a lot of ways, it's different from some of those rural communities, but I think having those partners was extremely helpful just to get us to think outside of the box and consider some of the tools that they use. And we were also partnered with an empowerment evaluator, so someone who really worked with us on evaluating the program, understanding what is it that we're doing, what's successful and not successful, and how do we take that data that we collected to really improve upon the Institute and make it even stronger the following year.
Yeah. No, we've been talking a lot, through these podcasts and listening to the Delta Focus stories and just hearing that as a repeated theme, just how important it is to bring evaluation strategies in from the very beginning and how important it is to be responsive and adaptable and change as you go based on what you're learning. Is there anything that stands out for you in terms of learnings along the way that have impacted the way you do your work?
Yeah, I think one thing that was really influential to me and to my team was understanding that there are ways to measure prevention. It's something that kept coming up as a question, like, well, how do you know whether or not you're preventing young people from experiencing or perpetrating violence? And there weren't a lot of tools to do that. And I think really creatively we worked as a partnership to create those tools and really explored, like, what are risk and protective factors that we're addressing through the Institute. And so if we know that a young person feeling connected to their community or a young person feeling confident in their public speaking skills are protective factors, kind of inoculating them from violence, then that's something we really need to focus on bringing out in them during the Institute. And we wouldn't have learned those things. We wouldn't have been able to create those tools had it not been for this partnership.
Yeah, excellent. So, Krista, from your perspective, and especially as Melody named you as a key partnership, what are you thinking, and what do you want to add in terms of how those partnerships have really enhanced the project?
Yeah, I think in terms of partnership, the whole Delta Focus project was really about learning and developing new strategies together. So a lot of what the team at the partnership, so it's even in our name as an organization, but a lot of what we did as the statewide coalition was really just try to convene people, make space for Melody's organization, for the other more rural program to come together. So we would use conference calls and video calls and also try to come together in person, which in a state as big as California, I think the closest any of us were was a 5-hour drive from one another or an hour and a half plane ride from Los Angeles to Sacramento, where we're based. So we did, when we could, try to carve out in-person time that was a little less structured and really just made space for conversation. And I think that's where we continued to see the best learnings and gave us space to bring in outside resources when there were particular questions. But, I think sometimes nothing beats the power of being able to get together in a room and just talk through and try to work through challenging, complex issues. One other thing I would add just on the evaluation that I really appreciated was the ways that process evaluation tried to look at even what the experience was for the youth going through the Summer Institute, for example, and how to move beyond simply measuring what knowledge they were gaining, which is, of course, important, but even looking at how connected they were to one another and what those social connections were between the youth in the room, how they were growing in cohesion and sort of bonding as a cohort that moved through the project, and looking at some of those other dynamics, which aren't necessarily what first comes to mind when you're thinking about a learning project, but that I think spoke so much to the long-term success and connectedness, and was in and of itself addressing some risk and protective factors in the evaluation.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think you spoke so eloquently to kind of the challenge that you have in California with being so geographically widespread and diverse. And I really appreciate Melody's, the intentionality that you raised, Melody, around partnering with rural communities in this effort, because I think about just the broad diversity, across California, and having a state like that, it begs intentionality if you're going to, engage in a thoughtful process.
Yeah, because I think, we really wanted to create a program that was going to be successful for our youth and for the community of Los Angeles. But, I think at the end of the day, we also want to learn from other folks, and we want for folks to be able to learn from us. And so we wanted to create a program that, even though it may have been intentionally designed to engage young people in Los Angeles, it's something that could be transferable to other communities with whatever adaptations that they need to make. But it's something that hopefully could work, as universally as possible.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're raising that. I'd love to move to that question around if others do want to adapt this project, kind of what you've created here with the Youth Over Violence Initiative in their own communities, what kind of advice would you give in terms of adapting it?
I think that a really key piece of advice that I would give folks is to include young people during the planning process, especially if it's the first time that you've done it. You know, Krista mentioned that the Institute kind of really takes on its own personality from year to year, depending on what community issues are coming up from the young people. So in some years, they're more interested in connecting domestic violence or sexual violence to homelessness. In some years, they're really interested in rape kit backlog, you know, whatever it might be. And so you really need to include young people's voices so that you can find out what's going to be most relevant to them so that they want to engage in that program. And I would also say, you know, to really focus on that evaluation part and think about it as you're working through the planning process, because it can oftentimes get left to the side or, you know, it's something we need to remember to tack on at the end. But if you can be really intentional from the beginning, then not only are you going to have results at the end so that you can create a stronger program in the following years, but you can make tweaks as the Institute or as your program is happening so that, again, it's just as impactful as possible.
Yeah, excellent advice. Krista, anything to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things that stand out to me is it's just an overarching recommendation to really start with the strengths that the youth are bringing. You know, so often I think we can, just as a domestic violence field, focus on trauma and harm, and this institute, I think, has thrived so much because it really begins from a place of strength and a place of trust that the youth are bringing with them the skills and knowledge that they need with, you know, a great amount of support and additional knowledge and skill building, but that youth come prepared and knowing what their communities need, knowing what they need, and to really lean into that. I also think about just the kind of, you know, very logistical kind of schedule and growing the Youth Over Violence work as it looks now in year 9 at Peace Over Violence is a big project that does quite a bit and does quite a bit of it over the summer, which is, I think, usually a quieter time for a lot of prevention work when it's usually happening in schools. And so, you know, I think first of all, knowing you don't have to be at year 9 level when you start this project, and to start with what seems feasible and what works well for your community and let it grow and evolve from there. You know, the more rural community, their youth work has grown over the few years as they've seen what Peace Over Violence, the Youth Over Violence work has looked like, but theirs doesn't look the same, and it's more meaningful for them and their community in the way it looks. So I think it's a sense of take what you need, take what from this structure can work for your community, and don't be afraid to adapt from there.
Yeah, great. So can you speak to, I'd like both of you to speak to the impact that you've noticed that the project has had. I mean, I can certainly see it from over here in Pennsylvania, kind of the impact that the work of this particular project has had. And I'm wondering, you know, how have you seen the impact in your community, in your state, on individuals? Kind of what are you seeing, and what can you share with us? So Melody, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so grateful to be able to say I think I've seen so many different levels of change. I think on an individual basis, I've seen what this program has done for the young people who have participated in it in the past. We have youth who want to return year after year and take on bigger leadership roles. During the Institute, I've seen young people be able to include this on their college applications and, you know, be able to get huge scholarships because they can prove their leadership skills through participation in this program. You know, we solicit applications every year for the 30 young people who will be selected. And I think, the fact that nowadays we get, about 100 applications every summer because there are adults and partners and teachers who are really pushing their young people to engage in this type of work is also a big testament. And then we've been lucky enough to share some of our evaluation tools in some state and federal settings, and just seeing that people are really thirsty and hungry for ways to measure their impact with young people. And I've felt really grateful to be able to share a lot of the tools that we've created with those partners who are looking to really be able to quantify the work that we know that they're doing well, but that maybe they didn't have the tools to measure before.
Yeah. Excellent. What are you seeing, Krista, from your perspective?
I think that the dissemination of the tools and experiences at the Youth Over Violence Project kind of across the state has really helped, provide ideas for other prevention projects that are getting off the ground or maybe have been doing great prevention work for a while and are looking to expand it in different ways. So we've certainly seen that. And I will say part of my role is to educate state leaders about prevention, among other issues impacting our communities. And so often when I start a conversation about preventing domestic violence, I sort of get a kind of confused look and the question of, what does that even look like? Can you really prevent domestic violence? And so, quite frankly, the fact that I've had the privilege of getting to work so closely with Melody for so long means that I often have this as one of the, top examples at my list that I can talk about in terms of what it looks like programmatically, how we measure it so that we know that there's impact. And it just is a really great concrete example among many that we can point to say, yes, we can prevent domestic violence, and here's how.
Yes.
That's been really powerful.
Awesome. So, Melody, anything else you think would be important for our audience to know? Any final thoughts?
I think one thing I would just want to add is that when we think of young leaders, I think we really need to expand kind of how we define that. We have young people who are part of the program year after year who, are maybe going to be valedictorian at their school. They serve as class president, but we also have students who have been on probation or who are coming out of juvenile detention or whatever it might be. But just because, maybe you're not seeing leadership skills or leadership qualities that you would think of so quickly doesn't mean that these young people don't have ideas, doesn't mean that they don't have the skills to engage their peers and engage the adults around them. And I actually think that because of such of the diverse experiences and stories that these young people bring, it just adds another dimension to the learning that they're getting from the Peace Over Violence staff, but also from each other. And so just to remember that there's potential in young people, and that, none of the issues that we have as society can we address without including young people's voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Great point. Thank you so much. And thanks for the reminder, to all of us as adults who are listening to check our adultism. And I feel like you're also raising a point about checking sort of the, our white supremacy culture and the things that we value and being intentional about shifting those things. Excellent. Thank you, Melody. I so appreciate it. Krista, is there any, last thing you want to add in our last minute together?
I don't think I could have said it any better than Melody, so I'm going to let her have the last word on reminders for us all.
Thank you. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with both of you about the Youth Over Violence Leadership Institute and internship program. I'm so excited about the work that you've been doing over these 9 years. I'm excited to see what's going to come next. And Melody, if people want to learn more about youth over violence, what should they do?
They should go to our website, which is peaceoverviolence.org. And we also have an Instagram account dedicated just to the Youth Over Violence program. And you can find us on Instagram at Youth Over Violence.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
You just listened to Stories of Transformation, a NRCDV radio podcast production. To learn more about lessons learned from Delta Focus, visit the Innovation section of PreventIPV.org. You can hear our other podcasts and access additional resources on gender-based violence and related topics at NRCDV.org. NRCDV radio podcasts are brought to you by the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence and supported by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Family and Youth Services Bureau.